So you've probably heard that people are using their personal brand to change the course of their lives. People are using their strong personal brand to excel in their careers, to build businesses, to build communities, to be paid to speak. But you're probably sitting there with your multiple passions and interests thinking, I actually don't know where to start. I don't know how to build a coherent brand that leans into a lot of my skills and my passions and interests without losing myself. Basically, you're sitting there thinking, what the helly? And I completely get it, because I've been there as someone with multiple passions and interests, thinking I don't know where my place is, or I don't know how to present all that I have to offer so that I can attract the right things. But I've been through this process over the last 5 years, I'd say at least, that I've been online. And I've got some things that I'd like to share. Specifically in this video, I want to share 3 models for personal branding for those of us with multiple passions and interests, but also a formula that allows you to build clarity and a coherent brand without hyper niching down or feeling like you're losing yourself. Effectively going from what feels like chaos to clarity. So let's just get into it. But first, I want to clarify what personal branding is and what it isn't, because this is going to lay the foundation for everything else that we're building. So let's start off with what personal branding isn't, because contrary to popular belief, it isn't about showing everything about you at once, right? Or trying to share all of the facets of your life and cram it into this brand. Even for someone with multiple passions and interests, that is still not what a brand is about. And I know that might not be what you want to hear, but that's actually not what any of us are doing. Most of us have things that we kind of keep behind, or, we don't share in public, or because it's just for us, or it's just for our family and our communities. And we can think about some of the things in our lives in that kind of a way, that some things are about the brand that I'm building and the opportunities that I'm trying to attract, and other things are more about me and my personal life. So personal branding isn't about sharing everything. But on the other side, it's also not about being one-dimensional. We know that as human beings, we're multifaceted. Even if people are not claiming the modern Renaissance kind of path, everyone is doing multiple things in different realms, whether it's to do with their fitness and sports, or their creativity, or their work, or their home life, their relationships. There's layers to all of us. And when we're seeking to connect with personal brands, we're looking for humanity. We're looking for that kind of connection that only comes with recognizing that, this person has layers to them, and I can identify with a number of those layers and make a connection where I think there's an opportunity here that I want to present to you, whether it's a career opportunity, looking at your multiple layers, the multiple dimensions. Again, not everything, but enough that I can see that you are of interest, or that I can make a connection with you. So this is why personal branding is not something that multi-passionate people cannot do. Actually, it's something they can excel in when they get clarity. The next thing personal branding isn't is about having millions of followers, right? It's so interesting because as my following grew, and we're now about 160,000 here on YouTube and across platforms over 200,000, but I realized that there were people with far superior, far stronger brands than mine, and they had very small followings, right? I say that not to diminish their work, but they didn't have big numbers, and yet they were able to attract very, very high quality and aligned opportunities. And so this thing about personal branding is not about necessarily growth, and it's not synonymous with being a stereotypical influencer. Your personal brand is different to that. And so don't worry that, maybe I'm just at the start of my journey, or maybe I don't actually have an interest in growing a big following. That's not what this is about. And finally, personal branding isn't about reinventing the wheel. Sometimes I think we get paralyzed when we're taking a new step or trying to move our life forward and thinking that we have to start from scratch. There are certain things in personal branding that work, that are linked to human psychology, that we can tap into, and that work kind of across the board. You don't need to start from scratch in that sense. So you can use foundational knowledge, information that you have access to, the wealth of resources that are online for free, or things that you might decide to pay for. Get that foundational knowledge and then layer your interests, your skills, your unique experiences on top to build that brand that will stand out, because there is only one of you at the end of the day. So if that's all the things that personal branding isn't, let's talk a little bit more about what it is. It is about a clear, consistent story. And that's how you can have multiple dimensions presented in a brand. But when the story is clear and consistent, people understand the themes that run across it. What personal branding also is about alignment with your goals. Whether your goal is just, I'm here to have a good time, I'm here to just showcase myself, or it's more specific about, I want to excel in my career, I want to build my business, I want to use my personal brand to attract certain opportunities. That doesn't mean that your personal brand has to only be about one thing, but with that clarity in mind, it becomes clearer on what it is that you should be showcasing, what dimensions make sense to be present in that brand. Personal branding is also about leaning into your unfair advantages. Again, once you know what your goals are, you can lean into the things that you are very good at doing. The unfair advantages that come from your unique experiences, maybe where you were born, maybe like what kind of school you went to, what you studied, studied, your career, right? The business that you own. What is it that you have a unique advantage in that you can use in that personal brand? That's a big part of any successful personal brand that you see online is they tap into their unique advantages. Personal branding is also about associations. What kind of feelings, things, places do people associate with you, the vibe, right? That's part of a personal brand. And finally, it's just strategically placing yourself. We already said it's not about having 1 million followers, but it is about being in front of the right people to get the opportunities that you want. So now that we have a foundational understanding of what personal branding isn't and what it is, I want to dive deeper into those models, those 3 models of personal branding for those of us with multiple passions and interests. And I think this is going to be really useful, no matter where you kind of are in your journey, for providing clarity for your next steps. I myself have applied all 3 of these models and kind of assessed the pros and the cons based on my own experiences, but also watching others and kind of collecting that data. And so the first one is exploratory, the second model is focused, and the third is integrated. And so let's break down each of those one by one. So model 1 is the exploratory model. This is effectively when you have multiple passions and interests that you're simultaneously tapping into without necessarily having a clear story or thread between them. You are just exploring things, the things that you're interested in, and you happen to be sharing them online and perhaps even offline, right? But there isn't really a structure or a end goal here necessarily. And that might mean that you have multiple, say, Instagram accounts where each one of those is linked to one of your passions and your interests or your facets. And I know this is somebody who had probably like 4 or 5 Instagram accounts on the go at once, right? But like I said, it could even be on you with one account, but you are just putting things out there and you are sharing. And there are some pros and there are some cons to this model. The first pro is that it's important if that's going to allow you to take a step at all. Because sometimes people get stuck in their own heads and they don't make any moves because they're not quite sure where their next step is or what part of them they want to share or what makes sense to craft their brand around. So they do nothing. And often people can use this step to a clearer brand, a brand that is more aligned with their goals. Additionally, it allows you to still tap into those multiple facets of yourself, right? You haven't yet had to pick and narrow down. And for some people, they like that freedom. But let's be real and talk about some of the challenges as well, because the reality is you are splitting your attention, your energy, and perhaps even your audience and opportunities across all of this. Because again, there is no coherent story or flow. People are unsure of, should I follow you here? Should I follow you there? Am I following you about this? Or what is it that I get from you? It's not quite clear. And in terms of your energy, you don't know whether you should be posting about this today, about that today, on that account over here. Like your energy and your focus is split, and that can become very draining and basically make you throw the towel in before you've had an opportunity to see where this could go. It's also very hard to leverage compounding effects because of this, because it's not like you are making progress towards one single outcome or single set of goals. Instead, you are just throwing things out there and seeing what happens. And so it's very hard to compound and, the impact of layering things on top and effort and energy and an accumulating audience and people that know you through this particular method. So if this is where you are at the moment, like I was at the beginning of my journey, it's not necessarily a problem, but think about the goals that you have and what it is you're trying to build and achieve with your life. And does being in the exploratory kind of model or phase, does that allow you to achieve those things? And if not, it's time to think about building out more clarity effectively around your personal brand and using the things that you've probably worked out and discovered in this exploratory phase in the next one. And so let's actually get into that. So the next model of personal branding for the multi-passionate is focused. Now this is where you build out a personal brand around some core themes, usually 1 to 2, maybe 3 core themes that influence and surround your life. But you allow yourself to weave in your other passions and interests as kind of secondary things that may infuse the way that you show up, the way you talk about things. And all of this is kind of threaded with your story, with your energy and your values. And I'll explain more and share an actual formula for this later. But at a very high level, that is what the more focused idea looks like. So instead of perhaps having my 10 passions on show at once, I've kind of dived deeper into one skill that I have, a passion that I have, and then I'm weaving this through with my story and the way that I show up. And there are some pros and some cons to this as well. One of the biggest pros is that it allows you to build depth and clarity around the kind of core themes that are making up your brand, right? It allows you to start to build that out and showcase that with more coherency. It actually still allows you to tap into some of your other interests without feeling like they have to be given the same amount of energy as your core ones, as the ones that are aligned with the goals that you're trying to achieve, whether they are career and business related, relationship and community related. You are able to see how these core values are linked, My secondary ones can showcase from time to time, but they're not diluting the message. It's actually also easier for people to understand what you stand for, what makes up you and your brand, and then what opportunities they might want to present to you. Because if they see you online and they have that kind of clarity almost instantly from seeing you or in person when you are talking at a networking event or wherever you are, and that's very clear almost immediately, they know that they might have an opportunity that links to you because of this. They don't have to spend exuberant amount of time decoding what it is you do from your 64 Instagram pages. It's there, it's clear, and they can work with that. It also allows you to decouple the things that you do want as part of your personal brand and to showcase, and the things that you just want to keep personal. Like we said at the beginning, not about sharing everything, but about sharing the right things that align with where you are. However, I think the biggest challenge for this is probably to do with the fact that you still feel like you're narrowing down. And I think to an extent with being multi-passionate, you have to understand that your life is a mosaic. Your personal brand is about showing up to achieve particular results, right? To get you closer to your goals and leverage the idea that if I present in a particular way and people understand what I am skillful in, what I'm passionate about, what my interests are, and how this weaves together, how I can provide value, you can tap into that and still continue to do the other things that you're interested in different ways. So even though this seems like a challenge or a con, it actually ends up being something that can be quite freeing. But I have said a lot, and that still might not be clear enough for you, which is why I want to now share the formula that I think this translates really well to so that you can apply it to your own life. If you are wanting to transition into this focus stage, either coming from the exploratory model or you're just starting afresh and you know that that's the direction you want to go in, let me break this down into a formula for you. And the formula goes as such: a skill plus a passion multiplied by energy to the power of your values. So what does that mean? Well, the first variable here is a skill, right? So a skill is something that you have proven ability in, something that you have maybe been training for years, maybe it's part of your career, maybe it's to do with something like speaking, something that you have a proven ability and able to achieve. And often this thing can positively impact others. Often you've exchanged it or can exchange it for some sort of value. Like money in terms of a job or in terms of opportunities. So the skill is quite clear in that sense. And it's important that this is part of the particular formula that we're forming, because like I said, a strong personal brand leans into your unfair advantages, the skills that you have, because it's harder for somebody to acquire a skill, right, that you might have been working on for years than it is perhaps because you share an interest and you've both been to like paint and sip once. That's very different. The second variable here is a passion. Now, this is something that you're not necessarily skillful at to the extent of the previous one, where you might be able to do it to a high standard, but it may also just be something that you're interested in, that you started to dabble in, right? And not necessarily been paid for before, anything like that. Right, so this could be something like music or design, right? For some people, their skill is going to be that. For you, it could be where your passions lie, something like personal development. But it is important that it is something that, given the opportunity, you would like to continue to develop and dive deeper into. And so at this point, we have a skill that we've been working towards over years and that we probably have some sort of unfair advantage in. We've kind of layered that or added onto that a passion, something that lights us up, that we have been showing an interest in and that we would love to dive deeper and infuse with that skill, that we were interested in finding synergy between these two and developing something very interesting. But that's just the first part of the equation, because every time you engage in those two things, you show up online or offline and you present it, it is multiplied by your energy. This is about the way that you show up, the way people feel around you, right? The way that you make people feel when you are talking about these things, when you are sharing, when you are building and presenting that brand around that skill and passion. Your energy is an amplifier effectively to that skill and that passion, and it allows you to start to draw coherent again and threaded stories throughout things, because your energy is present all of the time. And that's not to say it doesn't fluctuate, because I'm not talking about energy on a kind of a level of like, oh, I'm 100 today or I'm 50 today. I'm talking more about, are you a calm energy? Some people are very much like that, whilst others are very high energy. Like just by default, that is kind of where they sit. But let's talk about that final part of the equation, because it's incredibly important in actually anchoring you, because your skills, your passions, the amplifier that is your energy is all taken to the power of your values, the things that govern the way that you move through life. And this is really key if you are wanting to have a brand that is not always tied to particular skills or particular passions, even though we have spoken about how important that is in crafting a clear presentation to the world, right? When your values become strong, and when you get to the point where you're actually more known for your values than your skills and your passions, you're able to pivot in more ways than one. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but Please, the values part is incredibly important, and that's why everything is to the power of it. Just a quick interruption, because I know you're probably trying to take notes and absorb all of this, but I do have like a free info worksheet that I've created with the key bits of information from this video. So you just download that for free. The link is in the description. But back to the focus model and the formula, because I would like to share how I've used this when I was executing my personal brand or building it with this in mind, and the opportunities that I was able to attract because of it. The skill that I decided to lean on, or to plug into this formula, was engineering. I had been an engineer, or have been, for almost 5 years now, and I have a skill set and an unfair advantage in engineering, right? Whether it's through my technical abilities, ability to code, engineering the cloud, testing, quality, all of that sort of stuff, but also the frameworks that I carry with me because of my background in engineering. That's my skill. But I very much have had a passion for personal development since I think I knew what personal development was. And so that was a clear passion of mine, which may be not as easy to identify as a skill or an ability, but it was quite clearly there, and something that had not faded over the years, something that I was willing to show up and talk about almost every day and excited to talk about. And so that was the first part of my particular equation, if you would like. And then I'm thinking about the energy, my amplifiers. And it's important for me actually to get feedback from you guys, because I learn a lot from this exchange here. And a lot of the energy that I exude is a calming but direct energy. That is what I realize is the amplifier for me, where I'm not always about this super high energy and this crazy, but a calm, direct approach to life and to energy is what I think makes me unique and allows me to be able to build a personal brand that people know me for. They know whatever I talk about, I'm probably going to be showing up, and it's going to be amplified by my calm, direct, and perhaps even confident energy. Right, so that's an important part of that particular equation for me and building that brand. So now we have that layer. But I spoke about the values and how important it was that everything is taken to the power of one's values. And for me, that's things like freedom, evolution of self, practical application. These are things that I put very high in life, and things that govern the way that I behave and the way that I approach things throughout. Doesn't matter what it is. And so that's also embedded and threaded throughout my content, throughout the way I show up in person, at networking events, when I host events. Those things are governing my decisions and what I put out there. And that formula there has allowed me to build a personal brand that's attracted my 6-figure tech job, that has allowed me to build a community of over 160,000 here, but over 200,000 across platforms. It's allowed me to get paid speaking gigs. It's allowed me to host my own sold out events in London, build a community, all of these things, from getting clarity on what my brand was and what it is that I was showing up as. But I wanted to prove that this isn't just a formula that works for me and my personal brand, but actually applies to others. So let's now talk about some other successful women and their formulas. The first one is Tracee Ellis Ross, who is beloved by many people. But now let's plug her into this particular formula. Well, I'd say her primary skill is acting. Makes sense, right? Everything from Girlfriends, which I think I've now watched 3 times, and I don't even watch things like back to back. Anyway, not the point. Acting. Very, very talented actress, been in multiple roles, but she clearly has a passion for beauty and fashion, which is also present in the way that she shows up, and more recently in the kind of brands that she's launching and the products that she's launching. So we see these two things together. They're still amplified though by her energy, the next part of the equation, which if you've ever seen Tracee Ellis Ross, you might use words like joyful, radiant, or vibrant to describe her particular energy, right? Whether she is, on the red carpet, or whether she is talking about her hair care line or whatever it is, that energy is very much there when we see her, when she's being interviewed. It's kind of consistent, it's coherent again. But everything is to the power of values, like we said, like I will keep banging on about. And if I think about Tracee Ellis Ross and some of the things that she stands for, it's things like self-expression. It's things like liberation and legacy. And that runs throughout. I'll quickly breeze through the other two, but we have someone like Grace Beverley, who at the start of her kind of branding process had a clear skill in lifting and fitness, right? And she latched onto that as her skill. But she also had a passion clearly for productivity. And so those kind of two formed that core to her personal brand. But that core was amplified by her energy. I would use words like approachable, bubbly for someone like Grace Beverley. And in terms of her values, we have things like business empowerment for women, transparency in both health and business, and this desire to bring people in via community. Those values seem core to her and they run through everything that she does and everything that she builds. And finally, then we have someone like Michelle Obama, who's potentially, we could talk about her skill in being in law and in public speaking, but she clearly has had a passion for health on the physical level, especially with young children, but also on the mental level, right? And so those could be her core, but again, multiplied by her energy of which I would say is quite bold, powerful, strong, amplified by her values, which I would say are things like dignity, service, and education. And you can see how you can keep applying this formula to people who are very successful and who have very successful personal brands. And because of this well-established brand, they attract an audience, they attract opportunities that are aligned with them, that are aligned with their core values, right, that are aligned with their energy, that are aligned with their skills and their passions, because it's so clear that things can come to them. They become magnetic. So in line with my own values, which practical application and you taking steps to evolve, being very high up there for me, I have some questions that I think it's important for you to ask if you're thinking about applying this formula to your own personal brand effectively. Of course, it starts with what are you trying to achieve and what opportunities are you trying to attract, right? That's going to be very useful in kind of contextualizing the work that you're doing. But then you're going to think about those skills and those passions. What do you have an unfair advantage in? What have you been working towards? What do people pay you for effectively or would pay you for? Going back to the passions, what passions do you have that would be very synergistic with that skill and with the opportunities that you are trying to attract? Something that you still care deeply about, but you can draw on that particular one and plug it into the formula. What energy do you exude? What do people say about you when they're around you? How do you make them feel? How do you want to make people feel? What aligns with you and how you move through life? Because it's very hard to build a personal brand on an energy that is not true to you. If I tried to build this brand on this, like I said, this kind of crazy energy, which some people do really, really well, I'm going to fall apart. First, I'm going to be burnt out by like day 2. So think about that. And finally, those core values. So now let's talk about the final model, which I've called the integrated model of personal branding for people with multiple passions and interests. This is when the brand itself is actually about being multi-passionate. It is about sharing information on how you're managing, how you are evolving, how you are excelling as a multi-passionate person, or what you can bring and offer to other people's lives, other companies' lives. Like, what is it about you as that multi-passionate individual that you can bring to the world? It's almost a meta brand where it's not about pulling out those individual things, but about the topic itself. And like the other two, there are some pros and cons, but I found this very interesting in my life when I decided that actually my brand is being multi-passionate, is being a modern Renaissance woman, and is what lights me up. It in itself is a passion that I want to talk about, but also a skill that I've been developing. As leaning into my multiple passions over the years, I have developed a number of skills in terms of managing and excelling with this that I can share with others, that I can share with companies, that I can share with communities. And when I started to tap into that, something interesting happened. I started to attract opportunities that aligned with that. I was hosting a workshop at the Excel on why multi-passionate and multi-skilled people will be the future of tech, why they will drive tech forward. I obviously had my event in London, like I've spoken about before, that was sold out for multi-passionate women and personal branding. I've been able to grow community, and some of my best performing videos have been on this particular topic, either directly or indirectly. And I've been able to create a number of free and paid resources around this particular topic. And so you can see that actually, like I'm saying, the brand itself is about being a multi-passionate person and a multi-passionate woman. Some of the pros of this is, of course, it allows you to still tap into all those facets of yourself. And actually, the more that you do and are able to do successfully and, live a fulfilled life, just kind of amplifies the brand itself. It doesn't take away from the brand when I decide to add something new, so long as it's making sense, right? If I add something new and my life starts to fall apart, it's not quite the same, although there could be a learning there too, but you see where I'm getting with this. Another big pro of this is I feel like it allows you to bring your skills and your interests and your value to a group of people that have been a little bit shunned in society. This idea that you have multiple passions and interests and somehow you're just chaotic and scatty, instead of actually just, no, I'm just this type of human being and I haven't found a path or a community yet. And that's a really fulfilling thing that I have found with going down this route and building a brand around this. But some of the cons and challenges, because nothing is perfect, is it can take time to build this sort of brand because people have to get to know you still at your core and you still have to work out what your values and your energy is. But people are not as easy to tap into, this is the girl for engineering or this is the girl for, painting. This is the goal around multiple passions and interests is very different, and you have to establish yourself as somebody who is part of this community, for this community, and helpful for the community itself as well. And that can take time. I do think it also requires strong storytelling skills and structure, because you need to be able to convey what is to some just this, you're just a multiple passions, this is everything. But you need to find a way to present this value to the world effectively, if it is for the sake of attracting opportunities and the right kind of people. And so after hearing everything that I've said, you might decide that actually I'm in that particular place. Like, that is where I want to build my personal brand around. I think there'll be less people in here. I think most people will fall into that focused model in order to align themselves with the opportunities they want. But I wanted to kind of share that kind of spectrum of models, from the exploratory to the focus to the integrated, as someone who's been through them all and has seen varying levels of success. The last two have been far more successful when it comes to aligning with my goals and what I want to attract in my life. The key thing to remember is when you have a level of clarity around your personal brand, it is easier for you to show up both offline and online coherently and attract the right kind of people, the right kind of opportunities, and the right kind of community. And more so, your multidimensional nature becomes one of your biggest assets. And so I'm going to end it there. Don't forget, if you do want the info sheet, it is linked in the description. If you want to know more about what's going on in terms of events, in terms of workshops, in terms of more value, then make sure that you're signed up to the newsletter, which is also linked below as well. And I will see you in the next video.